Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Jessica Hynes' TV show, Up the Women. Now, this was a British comedy that ran for 2 seasons, only 2 seasons, unfortunately, because it was a really good show. The show is about, so it's set in the early 1900s, around 1912-ish. And it follows a group that we are introduced to in episode 1 as the Banbury Intricate Crafts Circle. So this is a group of women who get together in a small rural British town to basically do needlepoint, sewing, quilting, this kind of thing. And one of their members, Margaret Unwin, played by Hynes herself, proposes in the first episode that they rename their group the Banbury Intricate Crafts Circle Frankly Demands Women's Suffrage. This later gets sort of modified in the first episode during sort of negotiations about whether or not they're going to make this change and identify with the suffrage cause. This later gets shifted to the Banbury Intricate Crafts Circle Politely Requests Women's Suffrage, and that becomes the name of the group for the remainder of the 2 seasons. So that's sort of the big core thing of the show, is the push for women's suffrage. But what the main source of the comedy is the sort of disjunction and ineptitude of this group. So we have Margaret Unwin, who is our protagonist, the main character we're really following, and she is a devoted believer in women's suffrage, but she is the sort of archetype of the ineffective intellectual, right? She reads a lot of philosophy. Her husband is very sort of like he's in this weird philosophy space as well. We sort of pick up from the things that she says about him that, like, at one point she says, he's been very melancholy since Nietzsche's death. So this is the kind of family they are. Like, they are the kind of family who's like talking about these like high-minded principles over dinner and things like this. She also tends to put in a lot of effort for not very substantial results. And that's a big part of the humor of the series. She loves making speeches. She loves conceptualizing things, but they have very little actual impact. Now, her main counterpart is Helen Bute. Helen is a very conservative, which is ironic because there's one episode where there's a voting booth set up, and Helen tells her husband to vote for the independent liberal candidate, or the liberal independent candidate. I can't remember which. There's like 18 parties, and they all have variations of the words liberal, independent, conservative, and labor in there. There's just permutations of those 4, basically. But Helen is very conservative. She's very traditional. She staunchly opposes women's suffrage. And ironically enough, episode 1, the tension really sort of revolves around Margaret is trying to convince the group to support suffrage. Helen is trying to convince them to oppose suffrage. And Helen Helen says, the way we will decide is we will each make our case and then we will vote. And so ironically enough, Helen sort of enacts the very thing that she is arguing that women are incapable of doing. But Helen is this very much sort of upper crust, even though she's not upper crust. She's the wife of Henry Bute, industrialist. He is a ball bearing manufacturer. They are nouveau riche, and that does definitely come across with her sort of obsession with keeping up appearances and things like this. But because she is very much invested in this, again, it's this sort of like nouveau riche notion of what it means to be proper and aristocratic or things like this. So she's the sort of main antagonist who is continually thwarting or undermining Margaret's attempts to build suffrage action. And then around them, we have another constellation of the main characters of the show who are at different levels of commitment and have their own distinct ways in which they bring humor to the show. You have Eva, who throughout most of the series has 14 children and is pregnant with her 15th. She's not particularly bright. She's kind, but her commitment to women's suffrage is more a commitment to her husband lets her be in this space because there are no men around. Which, of course, is not entirely true, because we have Thomas, who is a young man with hereditary ganglions that mean his wrists are weak. And so he is incapable of playing sport of any kind, but he is a devoted supporter of women's suffrage. And ironically enough, he is often more effective. Not necessarily effective, but he's often more he is more likely to actually take actions that support suffrage. Like, there's one episode where the group agrees to go on hunger strike, and Thomas is the only one who actually stops eating. Everybody else just continues eating while complaining about how difficult the hunger strike is. But Thomas started, we find out when he first enters, he started 2 days earlier when they were actually supposed to start, whereas everyone else has continued eating up through that episode. So you've got Thomas, and the main character that he plays off of is Emily, which is Helen Bute's daughter. So Emily Bute is the heiress to the Bute fortune. She is an eligible young society lady, but she is also a militant suffragette in a way that Margaret and the others are not. There's a rival group of suffragettes in the town of Banbury, and that's the Banbury Free Suffrage Army. And they are much more like direct action. The first time we hear of them is when they deface a statue of Venus in the town commons or the town gardens or something like this. But they are like, we're continually getting reports where they have like defaced property, or they've destroyed the train tracks in the area or things like that. And Emily is a big fan of them because they are taking this direct action, whereas what the Banbury Intricate Craft Circle politely requests women's suffrage tends to do is to put a flurry of energy into doing these things that no one really takes notice of. So Emily is supposed to be Helen's daughter, and she is Helen's daughter. She's not supposed to be, but she's supposed to be this society debutante who's going to marry one of the Smoot sons, preferably the oldest Smoot son, before he gets disinherited. Then she is supposed to marry the second Smoot son, the Smooths of Sheffield, the spoon manufacturing empire. So again, it is this very like nouveau riche bourgeois storyline But Emily rejects all of this. She rejects this worldview in the name of pursuing political militancy. And it's not entirely clear how much that is a genuine political commitment versus how much that's about annoying her mother. And she does admit in some episodes that she has done things that she's done mostly to annoy her mother. But it also does seem to be a genuine political commitment. So I don't want to downplay her actual belief, but there is a blend there, and it's not always clear where that blend exists. The other member of Helen's family who's in the show is Myrtle. She is an older woman, Helen's mother, and basically she's sex mad. That's her shtick throughout the thing. She's very witty. She's extremely funny. She's very caustic to Helen, which is a good source of amusement as well. But her primary interest and the stories that she primarily tells are largely about her sexual and romantic exploits, often in these exotic locales in Italy or wherever it is. You've got, and then the other major character is Gwen. And Gwen is a seamstress. So she's the only one of this group who's working class as opposed to bourgeois. She ends up as kind of the group's general dog's body and whipping boy. She's continually insulted throughout the series, and she's very meek about it. She generally takes it and agrees with the insults or the critiques of her. She's continually put to work, often being made to do all of the tasks for the group. And that becomes a kind of source of humor as well. There's one episode in which Margaret is trying to get a bunch of working class women to come and listen to her speech about women's suffrage. And there's one point where no one has shown up and they're ready to start breaking stuff down. And Eva and Myrtle are high at this point because they've been drinking tea laced with this snake oil potion, one of the primary ingredients of which is cocaine. So they're hopped up and they're just dancing the cakewalk. And Eva keeps being "Oh, Gwen, come dance with us." And Gwen's No, I've just got to put away all the chairs and sweep the floors and dust the wainscoting and throw away all the food. And Margaret's "Oh, Gwen, you've got so much to do. Let me help." And Margaret's help is she picks up the broom and holds it out in sweeping position for Gwen to take. So this becomes one of the sources of humor. And that's an episode that's very, very class conscious, really, because we end with actually a really good speech by Gwen where she drinks some of the cocaine-laced tea, and she's "All right, I have something to say. You all sit down and shut up. I'm a worker. Here's my story as a worker, and I'm proud of who I am, and you all don't understand what it really means to struggle." And it's this great speech that's completely uncharacteristic of Gwen for much of the rest of the series, where again, she is presented as this somewhat buffoonish, timid, easily cowed character. And so it is a great moment of social consciousness in a show that's clearly fascinated by social issues and these questions of power, these questions of gendered authority and the dynamics by which society runs. But there's also kind of an interesting problematic element to the show, I feel. So the thing is, a lot of the humor of the show, a lot of what makes the show work is that it depends on the audience to presuppose that women's rights are natural, desirable, good for society. It assumes that viewers are already going to believe this, and that's why it's able to poke fun at the suffrage movement. The problem is, as an American in 2023, and this show is a decade old now. The first episode originally premiered at the end of May 2013, but I rewatched it recently. Women's rights in the US are substantially under attack. There is a regressive, very powerful regressive movement in the US trying to roll back women's rights, particularly reproductive rights. But there are also challenges to things like no-fault divorce, which are fundamental to women's rights. And of course, voting rights have been significantly eroded by the Republican Party over the past several years, although that tends to be targeted more at African Americans, Hispanics, other ethnic minority groups, rather than women specifically. But, so, I mean, this is one of the big risks with satirizing a movement like women's suffrage or the civil rights movement, gay liberation, any of these kind of liberatory movements aiming to gain rights for a historically oppressed group. The risk is always that the laughter be turned at the people of that group. The laughter be turned at the idea of women's suffrage, or, oh, those women, oh, look at Margaret being all ineffectual and whatever. And like, if that for a viewer becomes the way that they're looking at it, like, oh, it's so adorable that these women want the vote, but clearly this show is showing us they aren't really capable of serious political action. Like, then it does actually risk undermining the cause of women's rights. And I think 100% that is not Hynes's intention here. I think, again, it is one of those things where the humor runs on an economy of viewers already believe that the thing these characters are struggling to get is worth getting and is important to get. And I tend to agree, but again, the risk in depicting the women's suffrage movement or suffragettes as sort of ridiculous busybodies and things like this is that it can undermine that movement and the social goals that they set out to achieve.